Okay, so we finally come to the point where we want to program all these concepts in inheritance, base class, derived class, inheritance tree, and finally see an example of how this works in C# and in .NET, which, by the way, will be fairly close to how it works in Java. Okay, so let's go right away to C# and let's start typing base and derived classes. So I have started with this program, which is an empty form. This is not our ideal weight example. I have diverted to another program for now, just to give you an example. However, if we go to the program.cs entry point, we can start typing something in between the namespace, WindowsForms application 1, or whatever the name of your project is, and the static class program which the IDE built for us. So we'll just go in between these two lines and start typing classes. Now remember, for our example, we're going to build this tree here: object, clothing, sweater, and woolly. Now there's one exception. We will not write the object class because that class is implicit in every single one of these class libraries. So every program that we write with objects, these objects will automatically become children of object. So we don't need to type that in. That's implicit. It gets built by our system. So we'll start with clothing. And so, well, we'll go ahead and say class clothing, and we'll finish that up. And now we'll go to class sweater. Now class sweater does not stand on its own. As you recall from the previous video, clothing is sweater is a derived class of clothing. So we need to type that up using C#, and that'll do by typing a colon. The colon will mean class sweater is a derived class of class clothing. You don't need to type class again. Clothing will stand on its own, and it'll mean a class no matter what. And, well, we'll just open the round brackets and close them. And by now we have defined a new class sweater, which is a derived class of clothing. Let's go on to the last one. We'll say class woolly, which is a derived class of sweater. There you go. And so now the first thing that is new to you is the syntax for establishing single inheritance. So it's a colon separating the IDs of both classes. The derived class goes to the left, the base class goes to the right. So this means that class woolly is a derived class of sweater. Now class sweater is a derived class of clothing, and class clothing is a derived class of nothing. It's a base class, so it doesn't have any colon. It's just written as we already knew beforehand. Now the next thing to do is to add a new object of class woolly, which is the one we wanted to build. Let's go to the main point, entry point here, and we'll say woolly w equals new woolly. Okay, so that works. To show you this, let's use the debugger. I'll set up a breakpoint by clicking on the gray area to the left here of the editor, and I'll just say debug, start debugging, and the program will start, and it'll show me exactly that entry point, and the breakpoint has been set up in yellow, and we have a watch here. The watch is of a variable w, which happens to be our object. Our object is still null because this line hasn't been executed, but it will in a second once I say F10 or step over. And here I go. Now we have executed that constructor. The memory has been allocated, and now we see that we have our base object here. And well, that doesn't say too much though, because it's just an indication that it has 2 levels deep, and those 2 levels happen to be the classes that we establish as bases, but it doesn't show too much, right? So in order to show you the real truth about it, we'll have to do something extra, and that extra will be to create the constructors for each class. Now I know that I don't have to type the constructors for them to exist. the compiler will install them for me anyway, even though I don't type them. But I will do explicit. So I'll just say public clothing, and here's my base constructor. No problem yet. Now, when I reach the first derived class, I need to do something new. So I'll just say public and sweater. But before I go on, I need to link the constructor and class sweater to the constructor and class clothing, because those two classes are parent and child, or base and derived. So the way to do this is to type the keyword base. Now base is a keyword in C#, and it means please go ahead and call the constructor in the base class. How do you know which one is the base class? Because the signature of the class says clothing is the one I'm looking for. You'll see the effect of this pretty soon. I'll go to Woolly. I'll also say public Woolly and colon, and now call the base. Once again, the base will be known by the compiler when it says, okay, please go call the constructor of our base class, which happens to be sweater. Okay, so now let's show you how this is working. Recall that in the previous video I showed you this example in which I wanted an instance of class Woolly, but before I could start doing Woolly, I needed to go up until I reached the most general class, or the most base one, which was objects, and then I started building things from the inside out. So I jumped from object to clothing, leaving traces of the attributes and methods of object, and then I did the same thing for clothing, and the same thing for sweater, and then for Woolly. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to show it to you in the debugger. So if I run the debugger now, here I go. Now, instead of just jumping over the constructor, I'm going to go in, and here I go. Before I start anything, I'll run the constructor for class Woolly, but before I run the contents of the constructor, I'm going to go to base. So if I still step into, I'll go to sweater, and sweater is right there. Before I call anything inside the body of the constructor for sweater, I'll call the constructor of class clothing, and this I'll see by stepping into. Once again, now I have reached class clothing, which has no more base classes. So here I'll just execute it, and I'll just jump over it, and I'll return to sweater, which is the same thing as I did before. I was in clothing, I return to sweater. I'm adding all the layers that I told you before. This doesn't show up here in the debugger, but it's happening anyway. When I finish running the constructor for sweater, I'll just go back to Woolly, and once I finish Woolly, I'll just finish creating my object. So the object has been created. It has everything that I told you before, but now you have seen all the process by which the object gets actually built, constructed. And so this demo ends by telling you that we have base classes, derived classes, inheritance tree, and we have started building a library of our own in C#. So for now, that's it. Thanks for watching.